So before the break, we discussed PROG scissors, and we stopped at just finishing discussion. And I mentioned that when we have navigation after clicking button like this idea doesn't work with form, because for the form it's not click event, for the form it is submit event, and it's not guaranteed to be done before navigation. So if we use submit event and we want to navigate, we have to navigate after clicking button. We have to navigate using script. It's not difficult, it's just one line of the code, but it must be inside of TypeScript and not inside of not inside of HTML. Not difficult, just different place and different code. So I will stop with this one, and next I will open example. So let's clone it. MealPreference Angular. This example contains 4 branches, and I will explain 2 of them. 2 others require different GUI, and we will talk about that GUI later. So let's clone it. I will close this and clone repository. Command V. MealPreference Angular. So what is the Trust project? What is the story behind this program? It is imitation, it's not real program. It is imitation of a legend, like some company organize full day event and with a lunch break. So they want to collect meal preferences from participants, and this program pretends to collect data. So this program is not a demo how to send data to the server. This program is a demo how to take input as Angular form. So it's not really sending data anywhere, but it does demonstrate how to ask user for the data and apply validation to it and show results. It is not really sending any data anywhere. You will see it is missing that piece of the code that would send it. Okay. So as usual, after cloning, we need to run npm install. Okay. It has the same as you see. I need to update libraries. Let's click run and see what it does. It has 2 pages, input page and output page, and it's also displaying some debugging info below. A real-life application will not display what you just entered right here. It is for demo purpose and for debugging purpose. So I'm demonstrating several kinds of inputs, and they are wrapped as a form. So we have text input, radio button input, checkbox, and select option input. So it is artificial combination of different data to show radio buttons, checkboxes, and text input. It does has validation for this field. It does not validate this, or this. From Spring Boot, you learned that you need to validate data on the server side anyway. But this validation is also useful because it provides feedback to user right away before sending data. So it makes program nicer to the user. Okay. So what we do need to validate data on the server side anyway. Why? Because we cannot guarantee that it came from here. Okay? Because server waits for requests coming from browsers. So it doesn't, so we cannot guarantee that it came from this JavaScript program. It could be something else. Okay? So it validates this input. We can set different conditions. In this condition for this input, touch it and invalid. And I set condition for this at least 1 visible character. So in order to see arrow that I need to touch it and it should be invalid. So for example, if I touch it and I put space. It's not one visible character. Now I see error message. I didn't click submit. If the program were on the server side, I would have to submit before I see error message. But it provides feedback immediately before I go further. So it is additional user friendliness. Okay. We definitely still need to validate it on the server side, because we cannot guarantee that input came from our program, because server is a separate program. So this is extra feature that provides feedback immediately. So now I set it up, validation, like at least one visible character. So if I type some at least one visible character, it will be valid. Please notice that output at the bottom update as I type. So you see, it's updating as I type. See? I type at the top, but it's updating here. Because I'm displaying variable value that is data bound to the form. And remember that when we data bind variable to input, when we change input, it will change variable. When we change variable, it will change input. So it works in both directions. Next, this is also data bound. You see, at the bottom portion is updated when I change radio button. Checkbox is data bound. You see, true, false is flipping, and this is also flipping here. I do display value of a variable and conversion to string. Type of this variable is enumeration type, but not a string enumeration type. So when I display variable value, it will come up as a number. And again, this is for the purpose of debugging. What is the difference from previous program? Validation, because previously it wasn't validated. When it is invalid, submit button becomes disabled. So there is a logic between validation and submit button. So let's see. When it becomes invalid, you see submit button is disabled. So when you start it, error message is not displayed because I set condition touch it and invalid. But it's still invalid, and just because it's invalid, you see it is disabled. So I use it forms, and using forms provides additional logic to data binding. But there are two kinds of forms, two common types. So let's see. So I'm going to angular.dev. This is reference site, familiar to you, right? Angular.dev and docs and forms. Here it is. In dev's guides, forms. You see, there are reactive forms, strictly typed forms. When you use strictly typed forms, it is default. When you use reactive forms, it defaults to strictly typed. It will try to figure it out, type from what you assign as initial value. But you can actually say what is type. And in this example, I will say what is type. There is also template-driven forms. And this particular branch, main branch, is using template-driven forms. Template-driven forms are using explicit data binding the same way as we did before. So this is why I'm explaining this first, because we're already familiar with data binding from two examples, and this is also using data binding, so it's quicker to explain. So main branch of this program is using template-driven forms, and template-driven forms do use data binding explicitly by ngForm, blah, blah, blah. It comes from the same package, forms package. A validation, it really depends on what form you use. Validation is different. Validation is different from template-driven forms and reactive forms. Dynamic forms, it is built on top of reactive. strictly typed. Okay? So you can show something typically done this way. You can show some other things depending on what you type, or hide things depending on what you type. Current example does not have it for simplicity. So what is template? What is dynamic? Showing and hiding things as we enter. So this is for the future. So let's start with template-driven forms, since it is extremely similar to what we already know. So this program contains input page and output page. Input page and output page, similar to what you will have in assignment. Input page has form. Output page just prints what you type it. In your assignment, you will also have calculation in between. We will discuss it when I post assignment. In the input, business logic is inside of the service, and service just sharing the data. So I have a meal choice. Is enumeration type defined through strings? So when I print this variable, I don't need to convert. It will appear as a strings. I also have portion size that is default enumeration type, and it is using numbers under the hood. So if I print this variable, it will show numbers. So I need to convert it. So I convert it using switch. So switch inside of the template to convert this enumeration type to value, to string. This is service that is just business logic. You submit user preference object, it is assigned to this, and this is the end of it. This is public variable, so it is shared. So all business logic just assigning to this variable inside of a service and reading this in output. So let's see how input works here. So we have input component TS. We have public variable, which is user preference. What is inside of user preference? In the user preference, we have username by default empty, meal choice is a fish by default, not spicy by default false, so spicy. Portion size by default medium. Okay. So what is next? In the meal service, meal preference has these messages will assign given this object here. So we call this method from input page. Okay, on submit event. So let's go back to input and see. We injected meal preference service to have private instance variable, so we can call submit user preference from the service to have this dot service. Remember that this is shortcut to declare this dot service and assign to it. So I call submit user preference, and this is user preference object, which is data bound to the screen. So it is content of it is data bound to the screen, so it is updated automatically by data binding system. Okay. And this is in import. It is for purpose of using meal choice inside of the template. So it has to be imported this way, so it is available inside of the template. I didn't type this code. Once you start using enumeration type inside of the template, IDE will add this line. Okay. So let's see what is inside of the template. By the way, on submit, what happens? I submit it and I navigate by calling TypeScript code. You see, navigation is not by router link, but calling router.navigate. And the reason I already explained that unfortunately it's not ordered right way. It will, if I use router link on that button, it will not submit. It will navigate, and just because it navigates, it will not submit, because component will be destroyed after navigation. So in order to order it in right way, I have to call navigate from submit. In order to call navigate, I have to access to router object, and for this reason it is injected here. So constructor receives two injections, one it is service and the other one is router. Questions? So let's see our template logic. You see that the most logic is in the template. This is why it's called template driven forms, or template based, template driven forms, because most of the logic inside is inside of the template. Most of the form logic is inside of the template. So input component HTML. Comparing from previous example, I do have form tag that is wrapping all inputs. Here it is, form tag. And I have submit event that is calling on submit. So it is event handler of a form. That will be called when I click submit button, but it's not on click. It will create event submit. Okay. And now I have variables that data bound. I have username from user preference, data bound to text input. I have 3 radio buttons, data bound to user preference meal choice. And I have checkbox not spicy, data bound to user preference not spicy. And I have a drop down list, right? Data bound to user preference portion size. What is this piece? This is template variable. We learned about template variables in the previous lesson. It is variable that you link to some tag to refer to this somewhere else. So this is my form, and this is initialized from library in G4. It's template variable. Okay. Where do I refer to it? I refer to this here. See, my form invalid. When it is true, disabled becomes true. This is how button submit becomes disabled when form is invalid. So I use it my form variable from here. Right? How do I set condition? Conditions are set inside of the inputs. So this is input tag, and this is a condition. So it's again, conditions for validations are set inside of the form. This is why it's called template driven form, because it's inside of the template. Okay. So how do I set it? Required and pattern. A required has to be here, because if I miss it, pattern will not be applied. So what is in the pattern? At least one visible character. Anything or invisible any number of times, one visible character, capital S, one visible, it is visible character. Anything or invisible, small s invisible, any number of times. How do I know this? Google it. I Googled this. So this is the pattern. How to display message? A message is displayed by using if. So how do I use condition? I refer to template variable. So name is the template variable associated with this input tag. You see, it's here. So when this input is invalid and touched, this thing is displayed. Okay. So this is how to display validation messages and how to set up validation conditions. Unfortunately, it is quite limited because it's inside of template. If you use the reactive forms, the logic is in TypeScript. You can write own functions to validate it and cross-validate it. So in that case, it is a lot more flexible. This is kind of really ugly, but for simple cases, it is the shortest. Okay, questions? So what do I have at the bottom? At the bottom, I display variable values as they are, including portion size. But portion size is displayed as a number at first, right? At first. And this is coming from switch, based on that portion size. You see small, medium, large. It is coming from switch. So this is the result of the switching. Okay. So when input is valid, it is going into a service, right? And this is just displaying data from the service. So output receives service injection, MealPreference injection. There is no declaration for the service as instance variable because this .service is not used. I use service.preference to assign this .preference here. And I display this .preference in the template. So my template displays username, meal choice, but I need to convert Boolean to spicy, not spicy. So I use question mark operator to convert true, false into spicy, not spicy. This question mark operator is called ternary operator. You're familiar with it from C#. It works the same. It means use this when it's true, use this when it is false. Portion size, if I display it user portion size like this, it will be number. So in order to display it as a string, I have to convert this piece using cases of switch to words. I didn't have to do it for meal choice because this is different enumerator. I already assigned a string. But this enumerator doesn't have assigned strings. This is why I have to convert it. Okay, questions? No? Next, let's see how reactive forms work. So I stop it, and I switch branch. Difference is only inside of, or almost only, technically it's almost only, inside of input. Other things are just for convenience, so they minor changes. Okay, so I'm switching to reactive forms, no material. What is material? Material is a separate GUI that comes in addition to Angular, related to Angular. So it's called Angular material. So we will learn about this further. Reactive forms, no material. Checkout. Yeah, I'll false checkout. By the way, I need to quickly talk about, I'm going back to main, and I will talk about one more thing. In the input HTML, please notice that this is value, but this is ng value. It is to go around a bug. Behavior is inconsistent. You see that assign to value works, but assign enumerator to value doesn't work. Okay. So somehow, in order to go around this bug, I have to use ng value here. Ng value is more general than value. Ng value can be used with objects, so technically it could be considered object, but this is also object by value works. So behavior is inconsistent. In my opinion, it's a bug. So this is the reason of using ng value, not value, because value just doesn't work. So I'm switching to a reactive form, no material, checkout. In this case, I didn't declare enumeration type, I just used number. But I still have to use ng value. So it's a demo of the bug, essentially. Because ng value, it is specifically to assign it objects, and you should not have to do it with numbers. But I had to. So in user preference, I decided that I don't use enumeration type, I just use number, just to see that it is indeed bug. But you can switch to enumeration type, it will work just fine as well. So in this version, it is number, not enumeration, for portion size. So it's not because I use different kinds of form. It is just to check consistency and show different ways of doing it. Now let's see input, a component TS. You see that I don't have objects data bound. I don't have this reference, I don't have that user choice object that is data bound. Because data bound is internal in this case. Object inside of form is data bound, and not form itself. Okay. So what is data bound is hiding inside of this class. So when we use reactive forms, data binding is internal. It's not explicit. So I need to initialize this in the constructor. So here it is, initialization. And it is initialized by passing objects to it. And objects describe the form. So you see, parameter of this constructor is object. So what does this object contains? Name of the input, group. So this is group, form group. And form group is called here, you see, form control name. Here it is. So this one. Okay. Also form control name. So it's the name of this control. Okay. Form control. Form control name. Okay. Assign it with form control constructor call. As this is the type. So it is type declared explicitly. If you remove it, it will try to figure out type from assignment, and it will take it as a string. So this is type. So it is strictly typed. This is initialization. If we need validation, we add it in addition to that. See, validators. You can also create your own validator as a function. You have to follow convention, and you can validate it with your own validator. Okay? So these are not validated, so they do have only initialization, and this is just a number. I didn't create enumeration type, although it would work if I do. How do I display output? It is picked from the form. This form value username, and this is no. This is picked data picked directly from the form. Here it is. When I display it, I can also refer to the form object, because form object is public. You see? Just because it's public, I can display it at the bottom of the input form. Okay. You see, I can display it because it's public. Okay. Right. So this is, you see, validation logic is inside of TypeScript, and initialization logic is also inside of TypeScript. Please notice that backslash is duplicated here. Previously it was 1 backslash, now it's 2. Why? Because 1 doesn't work anymore. Why? Ask them. Okay. It's a, again, we have to do backslash here because backslash doesn't work anymore. Okay, next. What is inside of component? Logic is similar but not identical. You have to link form variable, public form variable declared inside of my input component, so it's my variable name, to input of the form tag, form group. And we have on submit. Every input must have a tag form control name. Without it, it doesn't work. Form control name. See, form control name, form control name. And this form control name is linked to data binding. So data binding is internal. It's not explicit. How do I display it at the bottom? I could use dot, and dot works just fine. So instead of using this piece, I could use just dot. And it works just fine. This red is a fluke of IDE. So if I run the code, it will work just fine. IDE just don't understand that this is right code here. You know that these two pieces are total equivalent in terms of JavaScript. You can do this, or you can replace this with dot. But if this name contains characters that cannot be used with dot, for example, space or minus sign, it will not work. Obviously, because space will be taken as space and minus sign will be taken as minus sign if you put it here. Right? But if you have right name like this for a variable, it can be used after dot. And it is actually used after dot. Where? Here. You see, it's used after dot. But somehow inside of the template, it does not figure it out this right. So for this reason, in order to avoid red letters and avoid questions from students, why it isn't red, it doesn't work, no, it works. Okay. I decided to replace code with equivalent to avoid this red color. So validation is defined here as validators, but I still need to display message conditionally with if. And it is similar. You see form, get, and this is the name of the control here. Has to be invalid and touch it. In this case, we display error. Okay. Why do we need question mark? Because return value of this get could be null. If return type could be null, you cannot use dot. You have to use question mark in front of it. Why? Because if it is null, dot will cause crash. This is why compiler tells us do not use dots directly. Okay? You see, it's not compilable code. How question mark works? If this is null, just do not use what is after dot. Everything becomes null. So this is the logic of question mark. Do not call stuff after question mark if what is before question mark is null. Make everything is null. So it has to be touched and has to be invalid, and after this, if it's so, it will display error message. Disabling submit button logic is the same form. When form is invalid, it becomes disabled. Except, remember that form has template variable there. And now it's not template variable, it's actual variable, but from the class. So grammar, it is somewhat different, but logic is the same. Okay. Questions? Oh, so if no questions, wrapping up because it's time. Okay. Stop.